Welcome everyone to another Unreal Engine 5 tutorial. In this tutorial we'll be creating AOEs. These are spells that damage or heal an enemy or player in an area. So sort of like this fire that if I'm standing in it I take damage. Also this bomb that I can spawn and damage both myself and the enemy. Also a heal in place like this. So if I'm outside I'm not healing, inside I'm healing. And finally, a lightning strike that does an indicator. And the enemy can also do the same to us. So wherever the player is, the enemy will be spawning lightning. And if it hits me, I take damage. And I can kill the enemy the same way. Oh, now we're both dead. Let's get started. Alright, so I'm going to start here with a third-person template this time, just so that we have a character to move around with. I'm going to also enable the starter content and call it AOE tutorial. Now I've already created this, so I'm not going to do that again, of course. But then here's my third-person template. I'm also using the FX Variety Pack, which is just this free asset pack on the Unreal Marketplace. I'm going to leave a link for it down in the description. And I'm using some animations and decals that I created myself. I'm also going to give them for free for my Patreons. So first thing we need to do is create an AOE folder, which I've already created here, but it's empty. And we want to create our first actor, which is going to be our AOE Base. Now, this base class is going to contain everything that's common for all of the different AOE types we're going to create. So let's think, what is the most common thing for an AOE, or the AOE in its simplest form? So let me delete these two. Now an AOE in its simplest form is just a sphere collision. So let's call here sphere overlap actors. Now this function creates a sphere in a specific radius and gives you any actors that overlap with it. And that's how we're going to set up our basic AOE. Now this is going to have a location. Let's just say this is wherever this actor is in the world. It's going to have a radius. Let's promote that to a variable and just call it radius. And let's compile so that we can also default this to, I don't know, let's say 200 is going to be the default for this. And the object types, pull off of this and say make array. Now, for me, I'm only colliding with pawns. If in your game you also want to collide with different objects or things like that, just make sure to add them here. But for my case, pawn will work fine. And finally, actors to ignore. Usually when you create an AOE, you want maybe to ignore yourself. So if I'm doing an attack, maybe I don't want this attack to damage me. So I can say get instigator here. And this is what we'll ignore. An instigator is the actor that spawned this other actor class. Most often you also want this to be an option. So sometimes you want like a bomb to maybe damage yourself or your friends, and maybe you don't. So let's add a variable here and call it ignore instigator, which will be a boolean defaulting to false. And if ignore instigator is true, then we'll add this, otherwise we won't. So to do that in a simple way, we can pull off of this one and say select, put our ignore instigator as the option. So if ignore instigator is true, then we will add this instigator in our array, otherwise we will not ignore anything. And then anything that comes out of here, or anything that overlaps with this sphere, will come out of here. Now we also might want to draw a debug sphere so that we can actually see it. So this does a regular sphere collision, but we can also call draw debug sphere to actually show us something in the world. Oh, let me move these a bit over here. All right. So also the center will be the actor location. The radius will be our radius as well. And I don't know, let's make it something purple. Yeah, this looks good. And the duration, let's draw it for, I don't know, 1 second or 2 seconds. Thickness, also give it 1. And pull this here. But just so that it's also configurable, let's only draw this if we have draw debug sphere is true. So I'm going to create a variable here called draw debug sphere. And only if draw debug sphere is true, then we will draw this debug sphere. All right, so let's take a quick look at our variables. Radius, we don't want this to be editable by the person spawning the AOE, but ignore instigator and draw debug sphere, yes. So make sure to click this eye icon and also click on expose spawn up here on the right. So it's instance editable and exposed on spawn, but radius is not. We'll leave it as is. Let me move these a bit here. All right, so let's see what this looks like in the world. So if I go here, throw this, and I press play, nothing happens because draw debug sphere is false. So if I say draw debug sphere to true, now we play, you see, yeah, a sphere is drawn for 2 seconds and then disappears. Now, if I'm in this sphere, something should happen. And that's what we're going to do here. Now we're going to pull out of the out actors and do a for each loop. That means for each actor that is overlapping the sphere, or each actor in the AOE area, we want to do something. Now this something we're not going to define in the base class. In the base class, we're just going to call an event. So down here in the event dispatchers, add an event, call it on AOE overlap actor. And this event will just be called, and it takes an input on here on the right is the actor that we just overlapped with. So this is going to be of type actor object reference. Now if you pull it here and say call, now you can pass in the array element as your actor. Now what we're doing here is we're just dispatching an event, or we're saying that this event happened, and the person that's spawning the AOE will handle what happens on this event. In object-oriented programming, this is called separation of concerns, or in general programming, this is to separate what the base AOE class knows about what's happening in the world outside it, and what the actor spawning it actually knows, to make our project more manageable and maintainable. Now you'll see in a bit how this is happening. But we can also here, just for you to see, we can print the name of the actor that we're overlapping with. All right, so if I go here and I spawn it here, you can see that I'm printing on the top right BP third person character, because that's the actor I'm currently overlapping with. Great. So now all of this happens on begin play, but I don't want it to always happen on begin play. So I'm going to create another event here, call it spawn AOE sphere. And I'm going to move all of these things to my event here. Now, the reason I'm doing this is maybe because I want this to be called multiple times on begin play. So let's say, for example, I do a set timer by event, and every 3 seconds, set it to looping, we're going to call this spawn AOE sphere. Now, if I play, oh, that's a bit small. Let me maximize that. All right. So now if I play, you'll see that every 3 seconds, it spawns this sphere now. And if I'm inside it, it's going to print on the top left that it overlapped with me. Great. So this is an AOE in its simplest form, but we want, of course, things to happen. But this, for now, is our base AOE actor. I'm going to remove this, and I'm just going to call spawn AOE sphere here. All right, we're going to come back to this and make a few edits, but for now I want to discuss what types of AOEs we're going to have. So we're going to have something like an explosion or a bomb. And an explosion is just a single event AOE. So it happens once and then disappears, as opposed to an AOE over time. For example, fire on the floor. If you're standing in the fire, you want to keep getting hit every second or every certain amount of time. So we're going to create two separate classes for these two types. So back here in our AOE folder, I'm going to right click and create a child blueprint. And I'm going to call this BP AOE Blast. So, and I'm going to also call it base because it's also a base class. Now this blast base is going to be the base class for all of our blast effects like explosions and things like that I mentioned. Now let's open it up and see what differences it's going to have. So now in our base class we have this spawn AOE sphere, and it just calls, it dispatches an event when something happens. But maybe for our blast effects, for our blast base, we also want a particle effect to be played. And we want it to be played only when the spawn AOE sphere event is called. So to do that, back here in our AOE blast, we can actually override or extend an event from our parent class. So if we search for event spawn AOE sphere, then you're basically overriding the event here in our base class. But we don't want to override it, we want to extend its functionality. So you can right click on it and say add call to parent function. This basically says do whatever you're currently doing in the parent, which is all of this stuff, and then add something to it. And that something for us is going to be spawning a particle. So I'm going to say spawn emitter attached. Now I'm using the legacy cascade system, so I'm using spawn emitter. If you're using Niagara, I think it's spawn system attached, and then you can add Niagara effects. But I don't have any Niagara effects, so I'm using this one. Now the emitter, let's promote this to a variable and call it blast effect. And we also want to destroy this actor once the effect is over. So if you pull off here, you can say, well, oh, something is happening with my mouse. Okay, yeah, that is weird. What's going on? There we go. Okay. So if I go here and say spawn assign on system finished, this is an event that will be dispatched when this effect has finished. So let's call it I just call it system finished event. And here what we want to do is just destroy the actor. Now for good practice also, let's only do this if blast effect is valid. So if you go here, right click, say convert to validated get, then we can only check, we only do this if is valid is true. Otherwise we don't do any of this. Yeah, maybe if is valid is false, just wait 1 second and then destroy actor. Maybe that's also good practice. All right, so this is our blast effect. Now let's create actually one more thing we want to add, maybe we want to add a sound. So let's also create a blast sound. I'm gonna go here and say play sound at location. And the location is our get actor. Well, not this one, get actor location. And we're going to promote this to a variable as well, call it blast sound. Now we also want to convert this to a validated get and only do it if it is valid. Great. Now I want to clean this up a bit, so I'm going to take all of this and put it in a event. I'm going to call it custom event. Call it spawn blast effect. Whoop. Great. move it a bit here. And I'm going to take this and create another event. Call it play blast sound. All right. And then here in our event spawn, we're just going to call play spawn blast effect and play blast sound. Great. Now let's create an actual explosion effect that's going to be a child of this blast base. So in here in our content browser, right click off of the blast base and create child blueprint class. Call it BP AOE Explosion. Now open this up. You'll see here in your variables the blast sound and blast effect. And by the way, if you don't see them, click on this gear icon and say show inherited variables. So you see the variables coming from your parent. Now blast effect, we're going to set it to the explosion effect that comes with the starter pack. And blast sound, we're also going to set it to the explosion cue. Sounds like this. Also comes with the starter pack. Now by just doing this, let's compile and save and throw this, let's delete this old one and let's throw our explosion in the world here. And let's see what happens. Well, that was too quick to see actually. So let me add a delay here in the base class. Let's only do this after 1 second. I heard the sound, but oh, I have an error here. It says access none, trying to oh, I forgot to say where to attach it. So you need to attach this to your root component. And the reason I'm doing spawn emitter attached instead of spawn emitter at location is because when we destroy actor, it also destroys anything attached to it. So that's easier for cleanup, so that the effect doesn't remain in the world even after the parent's destroyed. All right, now let's look at it. Yeah, you saw it, but it still was compiling shaders. So let's look at it again. There we go. Now we have an explosion somewhere in the world. And we have 2 of them for some reason. Let's move it a bit up so that it's clearer. Great, there's our explosion. And if I'm standing in it, oh, it was too far. And if I am standing in it, again, nothing happens. Why? It should print. Let's actually go here and say draw a debug sphere so we see how big the sphere is. Oh, yeah, there it is. And there's the print. It's weird. Don't know why it didn't happen the first time, but yeah, it's working as expected now. But as you can see, the debug sphere is a bit too big for this explosion. So either you make the explosion bigger or the sphere smaller. Yeah, in my case, I'm going to go here to the explosion and edit the radius. Let's say make it 100 instead. Yeah, that's a lot better. Now what we can also do is, let me delete that, and spawn this in our third person blueprint. So if I go here to our third person character, just find somewhere empty and say keyboard, I don't know, X. When I press the X key, I want to spawn an actor from class. This is going to be our Explosion AOE. Where do I want to spawn it? I'll just spawn it where the current player is. So get actor location, right click, split this transform, and plug in your location. I'm not going to say ignore instigator because we want it to hit ourselves in this case. But I also want to push myself back or do like an effect when something happens. So I'm going to say assign on AOE actor begin overlap. And this is the event that we dispatched in our base class when an actor overlaps with this AOE effect. So we're just going to call this something like push back player. And what I want to do here is pull off of this actor and say, I'm just going to go here and say launch character. This is a function that I'm going to use to launch myself in the air. And now I can't pull the actor here. This is the actor that's overlapping with the sphere. But I can say if actor equals self, that means I'm overlapping with self. Put a branch here. If actor is equal self, then just do this on self. Another way to do it is you can cast this actor to a character and then call launch character on any character, but now we only want to do it on ourselves. You can also click these two. Now let's see what it looks like. If I press X, an explosion happens, but the character isn't being launched in the air. Let's check why. So first I'm going to remove this delay because it's quite annoying. And now if I press X, yeah, the explosion happens right away, but no print and nothing else. Let's draw the debug sphere to make sure that we're in the sphere. Yep, we're in the sphere quite well. Oh, I actually noticed quite a bad bug. When I draw debug sphere, only in this case does the rest happen. That's because off of false, we should also go to the sphere. So draw debug sphere shouldn't impact the rest of the functionality. So this is a very important connection to make. All right. So the print is happening, but this isn't being called. And I know the reason. So right now we're calling on begin play, we're spawning this right away, right? But we're not giving time for the character, or this blueprint to actually bind to the event, because this bind takes some time after this is spawned, which means that in the base class this is being called first before any binding is happening. So to fix that, let me remove this here. So on begin play, we're not going to call this spawn AOE sphere. We're going to create a new event, call it trigger. And in this trigger event, we spawn AOE sphere. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because we want to manually trigger these blueprints. So for example, here, right after I bind, then I can pull off of our explosion and I can call trigger. Now I'm making sure that I'm only triggering after the binding is done, which is very important. Now let's see what this looks like. There we go, explosion, and I'm being pushed back. Lovely. Now after adding this this trigger event, we also might want to modify here in our base to, instead of overriding the spawn AOE sphere, it's better to override the trigger event because it's more general. So add call to parent, and then this is what we're going to use instead. Whoop. All right, this shouldn't change anything. It should still work as is. Great. All right, and that's our blasts AOE. Now, I also mentioned that we have another type of AOE, which is the sort of AOE over time. Now, I'm going to go here and off of our base, I'm going to create a new child. Call it BP AOE over time base. Now, as I mentioned, this can be something like, you're standing in fire, or there's an AOE heal that keeps healing you as you keep standing in it. So this is going to behave slightly differently. It's going to have two additional variables. One is going to be our interval. or spawn interval. This is going to be of type float. This is how many times the sphere should spawn. So every time the sphere spawns, either you take damage or you do a heal, or basically the event is dispatched. So how often this should happen. Let's default this to 1 second. Make this instance editable and expose on spawn as well. You might want to edit this. And another one is duration. How long should this remain active for? When should it disappear or be destroyed? Again, instance editable, expose on spawn, and let's default it to 5 seconds. Great. So right now, if we look at our base class, we have this trigger function that calls spawn AOE sphere only once. But we want to override the trigger to call it multiple times. So we're going to go back here to our AOE over time, and we're going to say event trigger. And we're also going to right click and say add call to parent. And just so you'd remember, in the base class, the parent of the trigger just spawns the AOE sphere. So basically what we're doing here is say on trigger, we spawn the AOE sphere. But we also want to do something else. We want to keep spawning it every interval here. So we're going to pull off here and say set timer by events. And the time is going to be our spawn interval. So every 1 second, as we defined here. And set it to looping. We want to call an event. The event we want to call here, pull off and say create event. And just select your spawn AOE sphere. So here you have access, of course, to all the base events. So spawn AOE sphere is one of them. Now we also want to do something else. We want to check for the duration. After a specific duration, we want to destroy this actor. So I'm going to move this here. Let's actually create a sequence to tidy things up. This is the first thing in the sequence. And the second thing is also set timer by events. And this time the timer is our duration, not looping because we only want this to happen once. And this time the event is create event is destroy actor. And this event comes with every actor class, of course. All right. So recap what's happening here. Every spawn interval, we're going to keep calling spawn AOE sphere until duration is up, then we destroy the actor. Now, let's see what this looks like. I'm going to create a child of this. Right click, create child blueprint class, call it BP AOE Fire. Now, this is going to be fire on the floor, and as you're standing in the fire, you keep taking damage. Actually, one thing we also want to add here in our fire is spawning the effect of the fire. Now, this might not be the case for all AOE overtimes, so I'm not going to add it in the AOE overtime class. I'm just going to add it specifically in the fire class. So I'm going to go here, say event trigger. Now, actually, we don't want this on trigger because trigger happens... No, that's right. Trigger only happens once. So we do want this on trigger. Add call to parent. And we want to spawn emitter attached. Attach it to our root. And the emitter here is fire. All right. So if I go here in our world and place this fire, you won't notice anything. And I'm going to explain why. Because we're not triggering it. So if you recall, if in our third person we had to manually call trigger here. Now we could, of course, open the blueprint of the level. So if I go here and say open level blueprint, I can take this BP AOE Fire and just say trigger and call this on begin play. Now, this will trigger the fire, as you can see here. But if you don't want to do this, we can also add, let me close this. We can also add in our base a variable here and just call it trigger on begin play. It's going to be a Boolean, and if this Boolean is true, trigger on begin play, then you can call trigger. I would recommend doing a delay, like a very small delay here, just to make sure that if something is binding or anything is happening before trigger, then it has time. So let's keep it at 0.2, it should be fine. Now I can go here. Oh, I don't have access to this trigger on begin play because we didn't make it instance editable and expose on spawn. Now if I go here, I could just say trigger on begin play. Great, now we have our fire, and if I'm standing in it, you can see on the top left that it keeps printing, and after 5 seconds it disappeared. Now you can look at this again, print, print, print. One thing we didn't do though is draw a debug sphere to see how big it actually is. So the sphere is a lot bigger than the fire, so I'm gonna go here and play around with the radius a bit, say, I don't know, 100. Yeah, maybe 80. Yeah, 80 is better. All right, and that's basically your AOE over time. You can also play around with these durations, so I can make it spawn interval 0.1. That means I want to take damage every 0.1 seconds and keep it spawning for 10 seconds. So now the printing is happening every 0.1 seconds, and it's going to keep spawning, keep spawn for 10 seconds. Nice. Now let's create another AOE, and this time it's going to be an interesting one. It's going to be a lightning effect, and it's going to be different than the others because it's going to have a delay. You know how in games sometimes before an AOE effect happens, you get an indicator that it's going to happen in a specific area, and then after a delay it happens. That's why I created this decal here. So for example, you see this indicator that, oh, something is going to happen in this area, then after 1 or 2 seconds lightning strikes, so that you know to run away in time. And this is what we're going to build now. So back here in our AOE folder, this is a blast AOE. It's not an overtime because obviously it just happens once and that's it. So we're going to create a child off of our blast, call it AOE lightning strike. Great. Now go to our event graph here, and off of begin play. So as soon as this actor is spawned, we want to spawn a decal at location. And the decal material here is going to be my lightning strike that I created. And the decal size is 25, 256, 256. This is the size of the decal as I know. And the location is wherever you spawn this actor. So after that, we're going to say wait. So I'm going to do a delay of certain duration. This can be configurable. So I'll right click, promote the variable, call it delay before strike. Make it instance editable and expose on spawn, compile and default it to like, I don't know, 1 second. And then after this 1 second, then we call trigger. Again, this is another reason why we don't call trigger on begin play, because in this case, we want to trigger the explosion or the effect after something happens. Then after trigger, we want to destroy our decal. So pull off of our decal. Check if it's valid first. It's always good to check if something's valid before accessing it after some time. And if it is valid, say destroy component. Great. Now, all of this happens on begin play, which means that as soon as you spawn this AOE, it's going to wait this duration and then trigger. Let's see what this looks like if I put it here in the world. Oh, one important thing before we continue, we need to add the blast effect for our once it triggers. And here, this is going to be P_KY Lightning 3. This came in with the FX variety pack that I am using. And the blast sound, I don't know, let's use Explosion again. It's fine. Great, let's see what this looks like in our world. Place our lightning. Decal is spawned and lightning hit after a second. Let's add the delay a bit, make it, I don't know, 3 seconds. So, decal, lightning, nice. And if I'm standing in it, boom, it triggers a print on the top left. You can look on the top left of the screen, you're going to see printing that this actor is damaged, just like the print that happens here. Very nice. Now I want to add one thing to show you what happens when you spawn this from our character class. So just like we're doing here when we press X, I want to change this to be our lightning AOE. And then you see all of our additional options here. So delay before strike 2 seconds. Yeah, leave everything as is. Oh, we didn't also check our radius. Very important to check our radius. So draw debug sphere and see what the radius looks like. We might want it slightly bigger. Make this, but where's our radius? Yeah, so it's 200. Let's see 250, what that looks like. Yeah, that was about the size of the decal, right? So my decal was 256. This is 250. Yeah, that's good. All right, so back here to our third-person character. Now we're spawning this AOE lightning wherever the character is. Yeah, you can keep the pushback. That's fine. We don't need the trigger because this is triggered automatically after this delay. But let's see what happens here when I press X. Let's delete these from the scene to not confuse us. Yeah, delete that. Okay, now if I press X, decal is spawned, but you'll see that it's not spawned under my feet. It's spawned somewhere in the center of the character. And that's because well, I have an error here. Oh, this is fine. It's just a fire that I deleted. It's because I'm spawning it where the actor is. And this gets the root of the actor or the spine, maybe. For the lightning strike, we always want it to spawn on the feet of a target. So to do that, we're going to go back to our lightning strike here and add a variable, call it attack target. And this is going to be of type actor and object reference. Instance editable, expose on spawn. Now, here in my third person, I'm going to, oh, if I refresh this node, refresh node. Oh, I didn't compile. Now, oh, attack target here. So now I can put self as the attack target. Now what this does, or what we want it to do, is that if there is a target, spawn the AOE below the target's feet. So let's create a custom event to do that. Custom event, we're going to call it move to floor. And what we want to do is see where the floor is from our target. We're going to do a line trace to do this. So we're going to say trace, line trace by channel. Our start location is going to be our attack target's start location. Get actor location. Oh, and also good to convert this to a validated get so that only if there's a valid target will we do these things. So our start location is wherever the actor is, and our end location is going to be the current actor's location multiplied by 1 in the X, 1 in the Y, and negative 1000 in the Z. So that means whatever the current x is, whatever the current y is, and negative 1000 in the z. And that's going to be our end. So it's going to draw a line straight down from the target to the floor. Actors to ignore, you also might want to ignore the current attack target so that it doesn't accidentally overlap with the target that we're trying to find the feet location of. And now, branch here, if there is a hit, well, if there is a hit, then this value will be true. That means that we hit a floor. So we're going to break the hit result, break hit results. And the location of the hit is going to be our new actor location. So let's set actor location. So now we're changing the location of our AOE Lightning Strike actor to be our new location. And of course, if there's no hit, we won't do anything. Now, before spawning the decal, I want to call this move to floor function. All right, compile and save, and let's test this out. So I'm here, I press X, great. Now the decal spawns below my feet. And if I'm in here, boom, I get hit and I'm knocked back. Nice, just as expected. I need to compile this so that this error goes away. All right, now one thing we can also do to make this look a bit nice is that maybe after getting hit here, instead of launching the character, let's say here we can just play an animation. So play montage. Well, if I can spell it, play anim montage. Now I created just a basic hit or knockback and a hitback animation for this, so that you can easily visualize what happens. Yeah, so you see here, waits 2 seconds, then he plays the hit animation. Great. Now we're going to be creating one more AOE before we move on to integrating it with our damage system to see how we can create attacks out of this. So the next AOE we'll be creating is a Heal AOE. And the Heal AOE is, of course, an overtime. So right-click over the overtime base, create a child, and we're going to call this AOE Heal. Now, we're not going to do much here. We only want to extend our trigger. So add call to parent function. And we're going to spawn an emitter attached as well. Attach it to our root. And the emitter here will be this Heal aura. Again, this was from the FX Variety Pack. And if I say this triggers on begin play by default, I put this here in the world. Compiling shaders, it's going to appear in a bit. Yeah, and this is what the effect looks like. So what we're going to do is if we're standing in it, we want to heal. But we're not going to be doing this now. But as you can see on the top left, it's printing. So the event is dispatching correctly. Now we want to integrate all of this with our damage system tutorial from the first time, to see how it looks like in-game when we have an enemy and a player and they're both trying to do AOE attacks and heals and so on. So let's get started. Now to migrate all of the AOEs and all of the code that we added here to a different project, you can right-click on a specific folder or assets, or yeah, like all of these three or something, and right-click and migrate. Now, what migrate will do is it will find all of the things needed for these folders to work, or all of their dependencies, and it will move them to a different folder. So I'm going to migrate everything other than the starter content and the characters, because I already have these in the other project. And then if you select OK, it will ask you to select the content folder. So I'm going to go to my damage system tutorial and select this content folder. I've already done this before, so I'm not going to do it again. But now I'm just going to open Unreal Projects. I'm going to open the Damage System Tutorial project. Now that we have this open, let me show you a quick recap. So we had a player and an enemy. The enemy was throwing projectiles at the player, and the player could do the same thing. The player could also heal like this, and I can kill the enemy, and then I can heal again. So what we're going to do is replace these projectiles with some AOE effects that we created now. So let me first open up my player. So this is going to be BP player. And let's take a look at what we have here. We had, when we left mouse button, then we spawn this, this projectile. I'm going to keep everything as is and just add a new keyboard event here. So let's say when we press, I don't know, F on the keyboard, then we want to spawn an AOE. Now, if you look in the content folder, I migrated everything, so I should have the AOE folder here with the base, the fire, the lightning strike, everything. So here I'm going to spawn my spawn actor from class, and the class will be my lightning strike. Yes, plug it in here, and well, no, sorry, not promote to variable, split, and the location is going to be my current actor location. And remember that this location is just a fallback because it takes a target, and the target here is going to be get actor of class, and it's going to be our enemy. So right now I only have one enemy, so this is fine, but in your game you probably want to have a targeting system that finds the right enemy. But for me, I just target the one enemy that I have, and after 1 second it strikes them. And also I'm going to ignore instigator, and instigator here is self, so that I don't damage myself with the lightning strike. Now if I do this, it's going to, okay, let me show you. So if I do this and press F, it's spawning lightning on the enemy, but it's not damaging the enemy. That is because we didn't plug in what happens on the AOE overlap event. So let's pull off from here and say assign on AOE overlap actor. Let's call it, well, I already have damage enemy event. Now let's just call it damage enemy AOE. And then here, we're going to pull off this actor and call our take damage function. Now, if you don't remember take damage, this you can go back to the damage system tutorial and see what this does. But basically, it just calls damage with a specific amount. Let's say, I don't know, 20. The amount type, let's do something like explosion. These don't really matter now. Now the enemy should be taking damage. Nice. And the enemy should die. And they're dead. Great. Now I should not take damage in this because ignore instigator is true. So this is working as expected. Now what happens if we want the enemy to also do the same thing? Now we can of course copy and paste this to the enemy blueprint, but I want to make it in a bit of a smarter way. I want to move all of this functionality to an attack component. So we're going to go here to our content folder. Let's create a new folder and call it attacks. And inside attacks, we're going to create a blueprint class of type actor component. So it's similar to our damage system, which is also an actor component. We're going to have a BPC, which stands for blueprint component, called attacks. Now, this is going to contain just a list of a bunch of attacks that any pawn or any actor can do. So I'm going to take my lightning strike as the first one, lightning strike, and everything we did here in the player. Let's just copy this and place it here. All right. Now this, let's delete the instigator. We need to change this a bit, but now the target, maybe we want this to be a variable. Call it attack target. And the delay before strike, let's also make this a variable. And also the damage, let's also make this a variable in our lightning strike function. So that means you can play around with all these values when you call this attack. Now we want to ignore instigator, but right now we don't know who the instigator is in the actor component. So we can call get owner. Whoa, or get owner. Now owner here is of type actor, but not of type pawn. So what we want to do is cast this to a pawn. You can right click and say convert to pure cast. Now if it succeeds, you'll have a pawn. If it doesn't, you won't. So I can select off of this and say only on success, well, only on true we'll use the pawn. Otherwise there is no instigator, or the instigator in this case isn't a pawn, so you don't need to ignore it. Now this lightning strike function, I can now go to my player here and just call, well, first I need to add this component. So I can go here and say add our attacks BPC. Then I can pull off of attacks BPC and call lightning strike. Plug in my enemy as my attack target, 1 second delay strike, and a damage amount of 20. Let me rename amount here to damage amount so that it's clear what amount we're talking about. Now let me go to my enemy and do the same thing. So the enemy, if you recall, had a on begin play. Every 2 seconds it would call attack. Now attack here is just a function that checks if they're dead, if the player is not dead, and it shoots a random projectile. I cleaned this up a bit. It was all in one node. I just created events out of it. But this is what we want to override. Instead of shooting random projectile, let's say we wanted to do an AOE effect. So I can also add my attacks BPC to the enemy, and I can call lightning strike instead of shoot random projectile. And in this case, the target, or the attack target, will be our get player character. Now I only have one player, so index 0 will by default get this player. Delay before strike is 1, and damage amount is 20. All right, let's see what this looks like. Nice. So now the enemy is trying to damage me with an AOE. I can stand here, take damage, I can heal, and I can press F and damage the enemy back with an AOE. Right, now we're both trying to kill each other with AOEs. And of course our own AOEs don't affect ourselves. Great. Now let's add one more thing in our attacks here. Let's add a heal event, or a heal attack. It's not really an attack, but it's a spell or something. So let's call this heal target. And what it will do is that it will spawn actor from class, and it will spawn this AOE heal that we created. Now also what I want to do here is make this take a target. So who are we trying to heal? So in our inputs, it's going to take a heal target of type actor, object reference, and it's going to spawn it below the feet of this target as well. So if you recall what we did for getting the location of the feet in the lightning strike, this line trace, we want to do the same thing. So in our attacks here, before we spawn it, let's move this a bit, check if our, and this is not then heal target. Oh, I deleted everything. I only meant to delete this. So check if this is valid. And if it's valid, we're going to do this trace from the target's location. Oh, I already had actor location called here. Fine, I can delete that one. And we want to ignore this actor. So basically everything we did for the lightning, we just want to do the same here. And if there is a hit, then we want to spawn this AOE at the hit location. Let's say it stays for 10 seconds and heals us every 0.5 seconds. That's fine. Now we need to assign on overlap what happens. So heal target, let's say on heal target. Now we need to check if this actor that's overlapping is equal to our targets. Yep. And if this is true, then call heal. We're going to use the heal from our damageable blueprint to make sure it's this one with the message next to it. Now, the amount, let's say, I don't know, heal for 10. And if I go back to my player, let's say I'm going to create another keyboard event. So keyboard, I don't know, H. When I press H, oh, we actually had it here. Yeah, so when I press H, I just healed. Now, instead of heal, I'm going to just spawn this heal target from our BPC attacks. And the target will be myself. Now, the reason I have target is that so the enemy doesn't heal in my healing spell and vice versa. So let's see what this looks like. Now I can take damage. Let me kill the enemy. And if I press H, oh, I'm pressing H, nothing's happening. Y. So I'm passing a target, I'm calling heal. If heal target is valid, do a line trace. If the line trace hits, then spawn. Oh, we didn't trigger. So we can either say trigger on begin play or call the trigger manually here after we bind. Yeah. Now it should work again. Take damage. Press H. Nice. And I'm healing. If I'm outside, I'm not healing. If I'm inside, I'm healing. Perfect. Works as expected. As always, thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this tutorial, please consider giving a like and subscribe. The idea actually for this AOE tutorial came from a comment on one of my previous videos, so if you have an idea or you want me to do a specific tutorial, please leave it in the comments below. Until next time.